Hey guys, here we are at chapter 10 looking at the architecture of stratification. Essentially what stratification is a way of ranking entire groups of people. It exists in all societies throughout the world. And basically it's a way of perpetuating unequal rewards and life chances in each society. So if we look at stratification from a structural functionalist perspective, a structural functionalist would argue that stratification is a necessary element of society. The reason it's a necessary element, would argue a structural functionalist, is because some positions in society require greater skill. And a great deal of training. If you look at a doctor, for example, a doctor is going to have to go through a significant amount of training in order to get the license to practice medicine, whereas someone that perhaps is a manual laborer or, say, a garbage collector is going to require a lot less skill and a lot less training. Therefore, structural functionalists argue that the doctor deserves to make more money. And how are we going to get people to assume these positions if everyone is earning the same amount? Is someone going to really go through all that school and all the training to become a doctor if they're getting paid the same as someone that is sweeping the streets? Um, and then when you also look to what we attach value to as a society, for especially what's important to us, what in our non-material culture, we look at sports stars. Sports stars make a tremendous amount of money. Are they really that important? Who knows? I guess it depends on how you view them. A garbage collector is very important. I want someone to come pick up my garbage every week, because how the heck what would I do with it? But sports stars are going to make millions and millions of dollars, where a garbage collector may make about 7, 8, $9 an hour. Uh, a conflict perspective argues that inequality is not necessary to maintain social order. Basically, stratification is a result of unequal distribution of resources. And so people that have less access, people of color, people that grow up poor, are going to have less access to attain material possessions and to attain positions of power. And so conflict theorists stress that in order to understand social life, we must understand who controls society's scarce resources. The early sociologist Max Weber defined power as the ability to get your way despite resistance. So who holds the power in our country? Who holds the power is very important to consider, and it's very significant because it determines who gets the lion's shares of society's resources. Conflict theorists would argue that in our country we have a power elite. It's a small group of people that hold the top positions in the military, in the political world, and business leaders, and they make the majority of decisions that direct the country and arguably even the world. It's not a formal group that meets, say, once a month in a boardroom, but it does exist on a structural level. So then we move on to social class. And a social class is a group of people who share a similar economic position based on wealth and income. So we have the upper class, and these are the people that make the highest earning 5% of the U.S. population. They're usually thought to include people that possess the most amount of property or other forms of wealth. We could be shareholders of or owners of large corporations, top financiers, rich celebrities, politicians, members of prestigious families. And then we have the middle class, which is about 45% of the population. Some argue that the middle class is getting smushed down. We will see how that plays out if the economy ever decides to improve. So the middle class usually will entail people, it's likely to have people that are college educated. We have managers, supervisors, executives, small business owners, and professionals like doctors, lawyers, teachers, engineers. The working class is made up of about 35% of the population, and that typically includes industrial and factory workers, office workers, clerks, farm and manual laborers. Most people that live in the working class don't own their own homes, and they don't attend college. And lastly, we have about 15% of the population that is lumped into the lower class. And this is usually plagued by chronic unemployment And they generally, people that make up the lower class pretty much do society's dirty work. And after living in poverty for many years, there's a concept of a culture of poverty. And what that means is that people who remain poor year after year may develop a way of life that seems to trap them in poverty, traps them in the cycle of poverty. They may feel like they are never going to be able to escape. This is marked by low aspirations, thinking about the present and not about the future. Some may become fatalistic and passive and develop self-destructive patterns in behavior, and those patterns of behavior are evidenced in high rates of alcoholism, drug use, violence, family abuse. Um, and as a society, we tend to blame individuals for poverty and their circumstances, whereas sociologists will examine the structural conditions that perpetuate poverty. So what's the best way to avoid poverty? Well, that would be an education, which is why you're here, right? So, but does everybody have equal access to education? I can say that had my dad not pushed me, had my dad not afforded me the opportunity to go to school, helped me out financially, I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't have gone to school, let alone pushed on to graduate school. And single mothers are the most likely to live in poverty. 23% of all single mothers do not receive any child support, and 30% only receive partial payment. I know in our class we have a lot of single moms out there, and essentially the sad news is that single moms are way more likely to live in poverty. So this week what I want you to do is you are going to construct a 2 to 3 page paper that is basically your social class autobiography. I want you to describe your social class background. How do you think your life had been different had you been born into a different social class? So, SAT scores for kids whose families earn less than $10,000 a year averaged about 1,301. For kids whose families earned more than $100,000 a year, the average score was 1,637. Think about the different opportunities that kids that grow up with money have rather than kids that grow up in poverty. What if many of you have grown up in the working class or the poor class? So how do you think that this helped or hindered you? I guess obviously working, maybe some of you might argue that you have a better work ethic because you grew up in the working class. But do you feel like you would have had a different opportunities had you grown up in a different social class? If you grew up in an upper class, how do you think your life would have been different had you grown up in a poorer class? And I don't want you to focus on, I would have had nannies or individual tutors, but I really want you to think of even what your family structure, the difference of what your family structure would look like. If you grew up in a house where your mom stayed home, what kind of opportunities did that lend to you? When you didn't come home to an empty house, did you have somebody that was there helping you with your homework, driving you to sports practice, cooking dinner? So think about how different. What might your childhood have been like had you grown up in different circumstances? So I want you to construct a life history living in an entirely different class. How do you think your future would look different? How would your outlook and personality be different? So we have this idea that America is the land of opportunity. Some people are losing or not holding that value so tightly anymore, especially with the fact that our current economic situation is so grim for so many people. However, the majority of my students that have immigrated from another country will always still hold on to the idea that America is the land of opportunity, because we do have things that we take for granted. For example, if you live in a third world country, you may not have clean water. So we take a lot for granted in this country. So I also want you to think about the importance of ascription versus achievement in American society. Think about what you're born into versus what you work towards. Okay, so I feel like I talked really, really fast. I was trying to get a lot in there. So I look forward to reading these, and I want you to be creative and just really, really consider what your circumstances of your life, how it has shaped you, and how it has molded you into the person that you are. How might your life have been different? What are you doing to construct a different future for yourself and for your families? Have a great week. Let me know if I can help you with anything.